It is an honor to stand in the facility where I found and reconnected with a great-great-great-grandfather that my family knew nothing about for 150 years. It is astounding and life-changing for not just me and my family, but for the millions of African Americans who want to reconnect with a period in American history that devastated families. I'd like to show the first slide. This is the great-great-great-grandfather that I never knew anything about, Sandy Wills. He was purchased by Edmund Wills when he was 10 years old, transported to the Wills plantation. And you can see it lists his age, his height, and while he was at the Wills plantation, he bonded with 5 boys. Sandy was the oldest, and he had to file an oath of identity because they misspelled his name, as Ken knows was very common during the Civil War. Even though they had the oath of identity, they still gave him the runaround when he tried to apply for pensions. This is one of the boys that he escaped to go fight in the 4th Heavy Field Artillery, based in Columbus, Kentucky. And what is amazing about this story, which warms my heart and swells me with pride, is that they all fought together. 6 boys who were slaves on the Wills plantation all escaped together. Here's another boy, Andy Wills. There's another one, Mac Wills. You're going so fast. Richard Wills, Dick Parker. Stop on Dick Parker. The reason why this is fascinating, Dick Parker was owned by Edmund Wills. And as you all know, when you were purchased by someone, you took on their surname. Well, when Dick faced an enlistment officer, he said, "My name is Dick Parker." And when I saw this, I said, "Why is his name Parker?" And when I read his pension records, I discovered that he said, "I remembered that my mother, wherever she is, named me for my father, Dick Parker." And when he proclaimed his freedom enlisting, before he was actually free, he reclaimed his original name. I was very inspired by that. I made the initial discovery going on Ancestry.com. The initial discovery was made. I was just goofing around on the internet. I had no idea what I would find. I describe it to my friends. It was like going to Vegas and coming up all 7s when I discovered this gem of a family history. And if you continue, you'll see there's more. Richard Wills was the only one of the 6 who died in the group. Again, they all served together in the 4th Heavy Field Artillery. And you'll see at the bottom it lists how he died of disease. As Ken greatly pointed out in his award-winning documentary, more soldiers died of disease than actual combat. And after all the soldiers returned, there's Mac, and I want to point something else out that really touched me. You see occupation? It says slave. Occupation, slave. That's something that really struck me, looking at slaves who were trying to free themselves. They were illiterate, and their officers who they were reporting to saw them as what they were. Well, slavery is not an occupation. We all know that now, but it just shows you how terrible this entire period was, not only for blacks, but for whites as well. After the war ended, Sandy married, well, this is Sandy's discharge paper, which I have in my home. I am so proud of it, and I forever thank the National Archives. This is what's in my home framed, and I tell people that it was handed down, and I say, just kidding, the National Archives gave this to me, and I copied it on parchment paper. But this is an amazing document that I'm sure Sandy never even saw because he was illiterate. So wherever the original document is, I'm sure it was of nothing to Sandy, because he went back to a state that quickly became the home of the Ku Klux Klan, Tennessee. So I treasure this forever, and I'm so grateful that this discharge document proves that Sandy's tenure as a member of the United States Colored Troops was not in vain. After Sandy returned from the war, he married a woman named Emma, and this is how I found the incredible story of what they went through from slavery to freedom. And the United States government also, I discovered, and I'm sure you did too, Ken, from the records with the National Archives and the research I did on Ancestry.com, I found a pattern of discrimination against the black widows. And my great-great-great-grandmother was not excluded from that. And they put this illiterate former house slave asking her question after question, give us proof of your birth. How can a slave provide proof of their birth? They put her through bureaucratic red tape. She had to hire a lawyer. And one thing that also touched me, look at her humble X at the bottom. It kills my heart to see that X because that's government-imposed illiteracy. They told her as a child, if you read, we will break your arm. And to see her little X while everyone else's signature is in beautiful cursive and script, and she just put her mark. And that's why when I sign books today, I sign it with a big Cheryl Wills, because I remember that Emma was only given the opportunity to have an X. But in these documents, she explains how Edmund Wills bought her husband at age 10. The government pressed her over and over. I learned it from the National Archives. They said, how do we know that all of these children are by Sandy Wills? And she had a trick for them. Every time she had a child, all 9 of them, someone had given her a family Bible. And she couldn't write in that family Bible herself, but she had her former master write the names of her children in her family Bible. That's what she handed to the United States government. And you see there, they literally write what they see in her family Bible, a Bible that she could not read. But it was a Bible that held as evidence of a woman who had dignity and pride and love for America, even when America wasn't too crazy about her. And so I am proud today to stand in this historic place. I wrote this book, Die Free, A Heroic Tale, not really to make money or anything, but to share this incredible story with all Americans, that as we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, do not forget the members of the United States Colored Troops. Some 200,000 of them risked it all. And I'm so proud that my great-great-great-grandfather was in that number.
I do come here wearing many proud hats. The first is, of course, as a citizen who is moved not just by the charters of freedom here and the kind of top-down version of our past that we usually tell, but the bottom-up records that exist that Josh and everyone this morning who has spoken has detailed, and that has been, of course, central to my professional job as a filmmaker. I am, as Jim suggested, a board member of the Foundation for the National Archives, and I've had the pleasure of serving on this board for nearly a decade, trying to support a civilian nonprofit group, trying to support the work of the archives in public programs and to try to get the glories of this magnificent institution out to the rest of the world. And finally, I come as a filmmaker who has spent the last 35 years making films in American history and have spent more hours in the various places of the National Archives than I'd care to count. And it's so funny sitting here in this room, just arbitrarily looking around and seeing a half dozen of the films I've made represented by the images and the maps here. And some of these are images we've used to tell the story of Lewis and Clark or Thomas Jefferson or the national parks or the Dust Bowl we're currently working on right now. So everywhere we turn in this building, there's some subject that we've been drawn to inexorably and have tried to detail. We are at the 150th anniversary of the greatest event in all of American history, which is our Civil War. And this place is really the ground zero for coming to terms with it. As Josh suggests, this is not just the story of generals and presidents, but a bottom-up story of so-called ordinary people who fought on both sides, 3 million people out of a small country of 31 million people, 9 million in the South. 4 million of them were owned, 45% were owned by other people, and 21 million or so in the North. 2% of that population, more than 600,000 human beings, died in the course of this struggle. And our first line of real connection to that can be found in this building, in the records of the Civil War soldiers, who they were. I spent 5.5 years of my own life trying to come to terms in our own version of it in a 9-part series for public broadcasting on the history of the Civil War. And in the course of it, we were overwhelmed by what we could find here and realized that whatever we brought it back, however long the series, we would only be scratching the surface of the records that are stored here and the kind of glories, both obvious and discoverable, that are part of the National Archives. 150 years ago, about a month ago, on the Capitol steps, our newly elected president, Abraham Lincoln, was inaugurated, and in the last line of his speech, he talked about the mystic chords of memory that he hoped might evoke the better angels of our nature. These mystic chords of memory can be found right here. They're not an intangible theory. They are actually flesh and blood records of people. And during the course of my investigations, I met many remarkable archivists here, and one man who worked in the military history division, when we were done editing, sent me a bunch of papers of some old campaigns, you know, long forgotten, probably best left unsifted, and in the top-down version of history, they probably wouldn't have even caused a glance. But these happen to be the records of my great-great-grandfather, Abraham Burns. And it was a stunning discovery. He fought for Captain McClanahan's company of Virginia Horse Artillery. He was 5 feet 4 inches tall, had gray eyes, which I suppose is perfect for a Confederate. He stated to the copyist, Mr. R.W. Pearson, that he was a blacksmith in life and had been forced to join the Confederate Army, which I don't think is quite accurate. He was captured in Moorefield in the newly created state of West Virginia in August of 1863 in a small skirmish in which a few of his comrades were killed, several wounded, and the rest taken prisoner. He spent the rest of the war on his butt in Camp Chase in Ohio, which was not quite as bad as Andersonville, but I can't imagine that much better. He was finally released, paroled, as they called it in the parlance of the day, on March 11th or 12th, 1865, at Cox's Wharves at City Point on the James River near Richmond, where I thought all records of him disappeared. And I cherish these in the 22 years since they were sent to me. And it made my own investigation, my own very long and arduous investigation, and by extension my brother, who was the co-producer, Rick Burns, incredibly personal for us to get to know our great-great-grandfather. I've subsequently been back to Burnsville, Virginia, where he is buried and where his father Daniel is buried. I have been to Hillsborough, West Virginia, just across from Bath County in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, where his son, my great-grandfather, William, is buried. And this set a trail of discovery that has continued in the 22 years since I saw these papers. And then most recently, in large part because of the efforts that Ancestry.com has done to, in this great democratic effort, help to make available these public records that are part of the National Archives and to digitize them, I found out that not all federal records of my great-great-grandfather disappeared. In fact, he applied, as so many Confederates did later in their life, for a federal pension. It is one of the great great anomalies of this Civil War that after it was over, we sort of forgot a lot about what the passions were that propelled us. Those African Americans who were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, descended into a worse hell of Jim Crow existence. But for most white Americans, they were welcomed back into a society, though it is still, of course, the bloodiest war we ever fought. And this is my great-great-grandfather, Abraham Burns's, application for a federal pension. And so he lives. All of the people whose names you see, not just the famous, but the so-called ordinary, live.